I was going to share with you just initially a very strange thing that happened this week. Sad and strange. Unfortunately, a friend of ours passed away last weekend on Saturday, and she was actually, those UFO people here may know her, was Mariana Flynn. She was the president of the Sydney UFO group, and she died last Saturday. She battled with cancer and it was very sad, but anyway. So but the interesting thing was, and again, those people who come to our UFO meetings might have heard Pane Andov, who was a guest speaker there. So Pane rang me after, and he said, Sheryl, I just had this real urge. Yesterday I just felt all day I had to ask you how Mariana was. So I said, I'm sorry, Pane, but she's actually passed away yesterday. And he said, oh, wow, that's strange, because all day yesterday I just thought, I must ask you, how's she going? Anyway, so that was a very interesting thing. And then there was another interesting thing happened. We sent a message to Damien Knott, who's in Sydney. Sorry for those who don't know, but Darwin. But he's a sky watcher that we know down there. And when we sent the message, suddenly, wasn't it the Hallelujah song started playing?
Started at the word Hallelujah.
Yeah, started playing without them turning it on the
MP3 player, and the light, which is normally on when it's playing, wasn't on.
Yeah. So that was again a very, very interesting thing. So I just thought I'd let you share that with you, a very little paranormal side there. So and I did have wondered whether, because Mariana always had a very soft spot for Damien and his partner, so I just wondered whether she sort of flew in after she died and just touched base with them before she went off to where she had to go. Knowing Mariana, she probably did. So anyway, so I guess that brings us to the subject of the afterlife, and you know, I thought we looked at all different aspects of the afterlife, including near-death experiences and people who have had past life regressions and pre-birth memories and all those sorts of things. And I thought, let's go to the experts. Let's go to the Egyptians, because their whole their whole culture was based around the connection that they had with their gods. And I mean, wouldn't that be a really interesting civilization to live in, where that is the everyday norm? It's so different here in the modern Western world, isn't it? That we just don't have those connections, or it's not normal for people to have those connections. We have a very material life. And a bit like the Tibetans too, because they have that really deep spiritual connection too, where they live totally on the spiritual side of their life, to the point sometimes of their own material deprivation. But you know, have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in a culture like that, just totally connected to other worlds, basically, spirits from other worlds? I mean, that's a really different sort of experience to have, I think. And a lot of us here, I know, you know, we meditate and do all sorts of things, have done some shamanic journeys and all that together. But we do that intermittently amid our material life, don't we? So, but to be like that all the time would be a very interesting experience, I think. But anyway, so I thought we'd go and visit the Egyptians. And I think that many of us are drawn. Who is drawn to the Egyptian culture? Feel you have a strong connection? There's a lot of people who do. I have too. I used to wear little amulets and, you know, a gold head of a Nefertiti and all those sorts of things, all those different sort of artifacts in jewellery. I loved it when I was in my 20s. 20s and 30s, I was really connected to it. Now I sort of moved out of that. I don't know what that is. You know, why that we have those progressions from those things, but I had a really strong connection, and anything like this I just love to look at. So when we take a journey to the Valley of the Kings, which is just littered with tombs, as you all know, that's nothing new. But when we look at the majesty of the ancient Egyptian architecture, and the size of it, it's just gargantuous, isn't it? And then we look at the magnificence of, I guess, the creativity that they projected into that architecture. When you go inside the tombs, there's something, to me, with the ancient Egyptian culture, there's something familiar, but it's not. You know, it's the same as when you look at the hieroglyphs. It's something familiar, but it's not. And I think it's probably because the hieroglyphs are symbols, and the symbols, our unconscious mind connects to symbols really easily and pictures. So, and I wonder whether that is what calls to us. I don't know. But I sort of think that it's the beauty as well, the beauty of their images, that sense of familiarity, and just all the beautiful drawings that they have. They're just amazing. But in a way, for me, I think that there's an unspoken sense that the Egyptians were all over the mystical, magical sort of side of life. You know, it seemed to be projected into their drawings. And I think in the Western world, we lack a lot of that these days. We've lost a lot of that part within ourselves. And I think somehow that calls to us, that magic and mystery calls to us because our own soul, is longing for that, to answer that call in our own way as individuals. But it's just beautiful, isn't it? And mysterious. Isn't that a gorgeous image? Just amazing. There are various texts that have been recorded, that have recorded the magic and the mysticism, let's call it the mysticism, about the afterlife. And the first known written text was the pyramid text, and dating back to about 2400 BC. And then there was the sarcophagus text that emerged. And then there was the Book of the Dead, and that's what we're going to talk about a bit today. The Book of the Dead was a loose collection of incantations and spells and knowledge about how to go or traverse through the underworld, which to the Egyptians existed under the earth because they thought that the earth was flat. So
that might have been right.
Yeah. So they traversed the underworld, and the underworld's been called a few different things. I've got I thought I'd had it all over it what it was called, but it wasn't. It's called the Duat, the Tuat, and the Umdrot. So I might have different words here and there for that, but so it was a very loose collection of information, right? But it actually became into a more known definitive form in 650 BC. And then later on, so that's lasted for a long time, and that was prevalent in Egyptian culture, and we'll talk about that a bit more, but and then 1842 it was actually named the Book of the Dead, and then 1874 published as the Bible of Ancient Egyptians. And then people, as information came to the surface, people gathered more and more, and they kept putting it all together. So 1898, called Coming Forth by Day. So today we end up with a book like this, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Book of Going Forth by Day. Because remember, the Egyptian god Ra was the sun god, and they wanted to be with Ra, so they wanted to be in the light. So that I think maybe that was why we got called Going Forth by Day, because they didn't want to go forth by night because they didn't want the dark, they wanted the sun, basically. And this is the complete papyrus of Ani, and Ani was a scribe who worked for a pharaoh. And Ani was really, as many people in the upper echelons of Egyptian society, they, or everybody really, but they wanted their own copy of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, written down on a papyrus specifically for them, because it could be individualized for people. But they had to pay a lot of money to be able to do it. But they thought that they wouldn't be able to get through the underworld and to the afterlife or the other world unless they had the book of incantations and spells and all that sort of stuff, which would help them traverse. So if they came across a god, they could whip out a spell and they could say, and they could pass. So they had to go through all these gates in the underworld to get to the afterlife. Anyway, so Annie's become a well-known papyrus, Papyrus of Annie, and it was actually flogged, basically, by this guy, Wallace Budge, who used to work for the British Museum, and he used to collect artefacts from all different cultures, and he'd take them to the British Museum. Sadly, he cut the Papyrus of Annie up into 30-odd equal sizes to get it out of the country to hide it and bring it back to the UK, to UK, to the British Museum, where they had to put it back together, which was really bad. But fancy cutting up an artefact like that, my gosh. But anyway, I was reading on the British Museum website that they've got over 6 million pieces that they've gathered. But you know how many are on show? Not that many, that's for sure. Which leads me to believe that even now, what people think they know about cultures and their history and their mystical traditions, we still don't have a clue. It's just what those people like Egyptologists, for example, as you know, I know you know all this, will put forth so much information and they'll have their fixed ideas, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that, just hasn't come out into the public domain. So we have the Papyrus of Annie, which was 78 feet long. That's pretty long. And that's Annie and his wife Tutu. I love the name, Annie and Tutu. Now, as you know, when the Egyptians died, they were mummified, and all of their organs were removed except for their heart, because it was believed that the heart was the centre of emotions and intellect, and so they always left the heart in. And then the body was stuffed with a salt called, I've forgotten, what is it called? Natron. And then that whole mummification process took 2 months. And the body was wrapped in these resin-covered, you call them bandages, I guess you call them. And then, that whole process of mummification took 2 months. So when they were being woven with these fabrics, there were various amulets and magical things that were wrapped in with them, as well as being placed into the tombs. So, and I think they were called, might have been the next slide, apotropic, that's it, devices, which were to ward off the evil spirits and the harmful demons and all that sort of stuff that were ready to gobble them up if they didn't pass all the tests that they did in the underworld. So, and there's various types. It's quite a nice one. This is the heart scarab of Hatnefer. The idea of the scarabs, they were placed on the individual's heart, the person being mummified, because the dead were going to undergo, or were going to, after they got through the underworld challenges, they were going to go into the area where they would have the weighing of the heart process that they had to undergo. I might have that. Yes. So this is the weighing of the heart from Annie's papyrus. So you've got There's Annie and his wife Tutu. I think there's someone behind her too. And you've got Anubis here, who is weighing the heart here against the feather of truth and justice here. And of course, if the heart is heavier than the feather, then they're not going to make it, okay? And they will be gobbled up by this thing here called Amit, I think it is, some sort of strange creature. The result will be recorded by Thoth over there. And in some cases, as you'll see later, they put the hearts in pots. But basically that was the weighing of the heart judgment. And these are the gods who sit in judgment up here about the whole process. So this is where it starts to sound like a near-death experience, because in modern day near-death experiences, people undergo this judgment, but it seems to be a personal judgment, a judgment of their own experiences, their own life experiences, and that's what this is too. Their life experiences are being judged, except in the Egyptian way, they had negative confessions, which was really strange, because they'd say, I didn't make eyes at my neighbour, I didn't gossip about that person, I didn't steal from the person down the street, all that sort of thing, so that they could be they could be self-righteous in their statements. But the heart scarab was, of course they all weren't. So the heart scarab was placed in the with the mummy over the heart, so that when they get to this experience, if they haven't been as good as they said they were, the heart scarab would hide their heart of hearts, okay, so that Anubis wouldn't be able to know about all the wrongdoings that they'd done, which I found very naughty and interesting at the same time.
It's like public confession.
Yeah, beating the system, exactly. Yeah. So, this is a more close-up of it. Okay, get a better idea. And there's the Amat, who's part crocodile, part lion, and part hippopotamus, waiting to gobble up Annie if he doesn't pass that judgment. Okay. So, in the Book of the Dead of Hunefer, after that process, you can. So here's Hunefer going into the judgment area. The heart's on a pot in this particular papyrus. So remember, these are individualised papyruses, okay? So everyone can individualise their own and put in it what they think they will need, what incantations and spells they think they will need, because they know what wrongdoings they may have done, or whatever it is they think they might have to escape from. So they individualise the papyrus. Ammon awaits the result, a different sort of look, but same. Thoth's recording it, and then after that, Hunefer is presented to Osiris over there, sitting on the far right, sitting on the chair, accompanied by his sister wife Isis and Nephthys. So that's basically, people die. They go through this whole process where they are have to face many challenges during the death experience. They go to a place where they have judgment, and then passing that, they're cleared, and they go to a place where they can consort with the gods, basically. And in that way, it's very similar in construct to a near-death experience, except in a near-death experience, people return. Okay, except with the Egyptians, they also add on to that after they go to that place of the gods, they can actually will visit the Field of Reeds. And the Field of Reeds is a paradise sort of location, much like people report in near-death experiences. And except they can claim a piece of land and work it along their deceased loved ones and have a happy life, basically. Okay. And that's just an image of the Annie visiting his mummy in a human-headed hawk depiction, basically. What's it say? Yeah. So back in the ancient days, individuals were initiated into mystery teachings, and the only way that they could do that was to experience that otherworld reality. But what my question was, why was it necessary to travel to the other world and back before they were deemed initiated? And I guess for anyone who's had a near-death experience or who's had some sort of experience like that, it is a sort of initiation, because you come back from that and you are not the same as you were before you had the experience. There's a definite dismantling of your previous identity, and there's, in a way that you then reassess what you thought you know, and you look on life very differently. And so did the Egyptians. In fact, when they had those experiences during initiation ceremonies, they looked at the rest of the world as the people of the dead, because they had somehow been awakened through their near-death experience. But we'll get on to that. I'm a bit ahead of myself there. So this is a book that I have. I've got a few books here if you want to have a look at them later. This is the Shamanic Wisdom in the Pyramid Text, the Mystical Tradition of Ancient Egypt. And there's a lot of really interesting information in there, because the author, Jeremy Nadler, discusses that those initiation experiences were very much like shamanic experiences, initiations into shamanism, so that people would then go on and become shamans. So anyway, to answer the question I asked before, why do you have to actually go to the other world, come back before you initiate? Let's go to I'll just play this, say this. This is a statement by Plato, who says, "The living resurrection is the greatest spiritual journey a person can hope to experience in their lifetime." But he didn't mean a living resurrection like Jesus. He meant a living resurrection for the living, by the living and for the living. And that sort of gives us a bit of a clue as to, or another slant on how to look at the texts from Egypt being only written for the dead, or for the people going to die, whatever, for the dead. So here we have Tutmosis III's tomb, and the tomb here holds within it the treatise of the hidden chamber. And this is written on the walls. Very interesting. Talking about a journey. And it provides instruction on how the dead are to proceed to the other world, basically. And this other world, where you have to go to have your initiation experience, exists outside of time, is present, eternal, and simultaneous with the other world, what we would call the spirit world, I guess, interpenetrates the world of the living. I think that's important to remember, because from a shamanic viewpoint, the world of the seen and the unseen, or the unseen and the seen, they're the same world. Okay, there's no differentiation. And a place where all physical forms manifest and to where they return. And it's also an integral component of birth, death and rebirth, where we come from, where we go after we die, and where we reincarnate from, where we were born from. So if we head over to Saqqara, to the pyramid text, this is the Pyramid of Unas, and this tomb here, this tomb site, is just covered, walls, ceiling, with these texts. And they depict the voyage of the dead to the netherworld. So, and the pyramid texts talk, like I just said before, they talk about the same mystical experiences described in shamanism. So the Egyptians understood that the soul was very capable of disengaging from our physical body and then reconnecting to it. They had that deep understanding. This is another example of the pyramid text. Gosh, that's a lot, isn't it? Again, all the script writing is all very symbolic and relates to our unconscious mind too. A lot of birds in there. Here's some more. Here's a better close-up. Because there was a bird god. I've forgotten the name of the bird god. Just another one. So in the pyramid text, it talks about it, the experience is for the living and not left for when we die. Okay, the text is for the living. Rather than what I'd been led to believe a lot by the Egyptian Book of the Dead and various documentaries that I'd read, that was written just for the dead to journey through the underworld. But this is actually for the living. Okay. So I guess in one way it's in opposition to again, like I said, the general understanding of Egyptologists as they put it into documentaries, that it's for the living. And it sort of just changed my whole perspective about the Egyptians and their understanding. Well, here we are. This is what Freddie Silver's written. He says, the goal of the pyramid text was to expose the soul of the living to the wonders of the other world and return it to the body with a knowledge of celestial mechanics so they might be applied in daily life. And the knowledge of celestial mechanics means how, everything, but also how we traverse, or how we leave our body, have experiences, how we access information, maybe like the Akashic records, how we interact with the deceased, how everything works, but then we use that information in our daily lives. Now, how do we use that in our daily lives? Well, I don't really know. I guess you have to figure that out on a personal level. Just another shot of inside the tomb. Now, this is where it gets even more interesting for me, because this is a granite box that was used in the initiation rites. And the idea was that people would voluntarily undergo a near-death experience. So they would be placed in the granite box, and the lid would be placed on, it would be sealed with wax, and they knew exactly how long to leave it for people for it to catalyse a near-death experience, for the person to die temporarily, leave their body, go off and do what they have to do, and then come back. And there'd be a group of men standing around, and they would be, when the time was up, they would remove the lid, and the person who was in the box would tell I guess they were priests, high priests, what they had experienced. And if the high priest deemed that was right, then that person went on to become the king of Egypt. It was an experience that was just for the soon-to-be pharaoh, basically. So, and I found that really interesting, because if you unpack that, it's like, well, one, how do they even know that people, how did they first know that people could have near-death experiences? How did they know how long to leave the lid on the box? I mean, I'm sure a few slaves died figuring that one out.
Yeah, trial and error.
Trial and error, exactly, right? But then, and then it was only for the future kings to have that. So I'm not sure of the connection between, there's a few bits in there that are missing for me. But anyway. So it was a ceremony that they underwent, and it was actually brought about through the cult of Osiris, and but we'll get onto that in a minute. Let's go on to the next one. Now we've got the Great Pyramid of Giza, which was the tomb of King Khufu, and I think it was the Great Pyramid of Giza was actually originally called. Where was it? I think it was the tomb of. I didn't write that down. Anyway, it'll come. Never mind. So there's some really strange things have happened in here. I'm sure you've heard those sorts of stories where people had unusual visions, and when they got into some of those granite boxes. And I know in the documentary that Freddie Silver put together, he says that people who spend time reflecting inside its main chamber, including scientists, have reported seeing unusually tall people dressed in a kind of silk, emerging from the walls like figures from another dimension. And they also report travelling to other realities as people do in shamanic journeys. Now, I know that Colin Andrews, the crop circle researcher, when we hosted him here in Brisbane in 1991, 92, he came out twice. He said at a conference that we ran then that he, and along with a whole other group of other people, and I think one of them was Graham Hancock, but other people who were sort of working at that level, they went into the pyramid, into a secret room or a private room, I'm not quite sure, and they placed these crystals all around in a pattern in the tomb. And they also used tuning forks. And when he didn't quite go into specifics, but he said when they did that, it activated visions of these beings emerging from the walls of inside the tomb and walking across the floor in front of them. So that was pretty interesting. And when I saw this in Freddie Silver's documentary as well, I thought, well, that's curious. It's very curious. That's sort of, whether they were activating what we call the Akashic records, whether they were activating some sort of mystical tradition that somehow the Egyptians had been able to place holographic records in their tombs, I'm not really sure. Yes, the Great Pyramid was actually initially referred to as the House of Osiris, who was the Egyptian god of resurrection, curiously. So, the Osiris myth is that he was placed in the granite box. He was figuratively dismembered and carried down the river, then reassembled by Isis, who searched the land looking for all his body parts, and then he resurrects as a new being and becomes the god of the underworld. And that's very much a shamanic initiation process. So in the cult of Osiris, people would voluntarily go into these boxes and have those experiences. These are voluntary near-death experiences. Goodness knows what on earth they discovered through that. It'd be very interesting, wouldn't it? But it seems to me that even though the Egyptians have all this mythology around the dying, and they've included things out of their culture like, the underworld, it's full of lakes of fire and all sorts of, monsters that are ready to devour you if you don't pass all the tests, all that sort of thing. That's a culturally derived thing, I think. But in the same tone, the modern day near-death experiences, some people have reported things like hellish experiences, difficult experiences, where they've seen lakes of fire and all those sorts of things. And maybe there's a reason why the Egyptians reported that more than a positive, uplifting meeting of spirit guides that a lot more people report today. And that may be because in those days they were more focused on reporting the negative stuff. And that may have been cultivated by the priests so that the people did the right thing, just like religion tries to do too, So because people do have positive and negative near-death experiences, there's only about 20% of people report hellish visions of near-death experiences. But there's a reason, I think, why people don't report them evenly, because in the near-death experience research community, the focus is on love, light and forgiveness. And if you report something that's negative like that, I think that you find it really hard to fit in, much like alien abduction experiences, right? people don't report those as much now as they used to, because the focus is on all aliens are here for the good of humanity. And I think it makes sense that the future king of Egypt be put through that sort of initiation, that because, and knowing, with the priests knowing that how they can be changed afterwards, to give them that higher mindedness, I guess you could say, after they've had that experience, so they will rule the people well. I could see why they would do that, and shift them into their moral character into a higher ground. With all the stuff that I've read recently, but the experience that people undergo, the inner construct of, you know, meeting these challenges, going to the place of judgment, and then coming out the other side, you know, to consort with the gods, that's really a the inner construct of those experiences. It's quite it perfectly parallels modern day near-death experiences and shamanic initiations and all those sorts of things. It's another way of doing it, but the inner core of it has a pattern which we can recognise in other cultures too and other practices. Now this is my little add-on here with the Egyptian postures and the dead's effigies too, the various statues that they had. Because I know I've seen in many cases some mummies are being dug up and they've been bound in all sorts of strange positions, and they haven't just sort of fallen apart. They've been bound in a particular posture, and that's not just in Egypt. That's also in many other cultures. I'm sure you've all seen that sort of thing. And some years ago, I got very interested in ecstatic body postures, which is where people enter or use body postures whilst in ecstatic trance for a particular outcome. And I was reading the work of Dr. Felicitas Goodman. She was an anthropologist, and I think have I got her photos there? Oh, further down. And she wondered why these statues were made with postures. She looked around at all different cultures, and she figured that there was something more to it than just making these statues in those particular positions. So what she did was this is her, by the way. There. 2005 she passed away. But what she did was she got people to she researched, got experiments, got groups of people to hold certain body postures while they entered a trance state. And they did that with drumming and rattling. And so they entered a trance, like you do with shamanic practice, to the medicine drum. Okay, and that's right, I have mine here. And to shift the mind into that state, you're hitting the drum 4 to 7 beats per second. This is just 4 that I do. So that changes the mind's, brain frequency, I should say, not mind, but mind too. So that it's not just meditation, it's an ecstatic trance, which with meditation, as Derek said before, meditation, and I know you've all meditated, the mind is quieted. And some people say prayers are talking to God and meditation is listening to God. So you're just listening for insights to come to you and that sort of thing. But with shamanic journeys, which I teach, they're quite active. So, and you use, you start off by finding your power animal, you go into the underworld, you do that in various techniques, and then that's where you find your power animal, you journey to the upper world to find your spirit guides and helpers, and the middle world is the world of man. So, Dr. Goodman got these people together to experiment, to hold these particular postures. And I've just picked out the Egyptian ones because we're doing that today. So that's the bird woman posture of Egypt, which is, you can imagine, it's not a very easy posture to hold for 15 minutes. She got people to do that. And I've just picked out the simpler ones, the Egyptian ones, which are simpler than some of the other ones, which are really difficult to hold for 15 minutes. And I've done some of that myself. And these postures are done for certain outcomes. So this one is the diviner posture. So people are looking for, information. They would hold this posture. And that's very simple. Sitting there, your arm out and your hands here, whatever. And you just hold that position for 15 minutes. So I started to think maybe the postures of the dead were related to the connections that the dead had individually chosen to make after they died, to perhaps go to have those connections. I don't know. This is the Shawabti posture, and curiously, the Shawabti is, I think it's called the Prisia tree, and the Egyptians used to initially used to carve their little figurines that they were buried with out of that tree before they started making them in clay and all sorts of in gold and all sorts of things. So that's another posture that people practice, the Sekhmet pose. Again, these are the simpler ones, but I just pulled out the Egyptian ones. And the purpose of the ecstatic trance in holding those postures was for healing, expansion of consciousness, guidance and insight, and contact with non-physical beings. And I thought maybe it's possible, this is just my idea, my hypothesis, that perhaps some of those mummies were buried in particular positions so that they could make those connections after they died, and in the underworld and in the spirit world, basically. I don't know, it's a thought that I had. And with the Buddhists, you have the mudras, the hand positions and the body positions, and they do that for a particular reason, to send out or to create a particular energy effect. So Dr. Goodman, she established the Cuyamungu Institute over in New Mexico, and over time has actually found, before she died that is, had identified through her research 80 ritual postures, which she thought were doorways to physiologically precise altered states of consciousness in which ordinary people have ecstatic experiences, seeing visions, undertaking spirit journeys, and even sometimes speaking in tongues. So I think that the mysticism of ancient Egypt is a lot more complex than what we understand. I think that they understood near-death experiences in their initiation rites, and that they were purposeful and important, and only held for the king, the future king, because of the outcome of those near-death experiences. But anyway, so that's my take on near-death experiences, the afterlife, and the ancient Egyptian perspective.